Hey, what is going on guys? RvzStealth here, and in today's video, we're going to be starting Season 9 off with a top lane tier list, and I did take a look at your guys' suggestions for how you would like me to change the overlay for these videos, and a lot of you guys commented and said that you don't want to see every single champion that's in the S tier right away. So what I've done is I've just blacked out the champions that I'm not talking about at the start, and then once we make our way through the S tier, then the champions will become uncovered. If you don't really care for an explanation as to why the champion's in S tier, then you can just skip ahead a little bit in the video and the champion will be uncovered and you can see who's in the S tier. So to start it off in the S tier for this patch is going to be Pantheon. So Pantheon's just super good for the current meta, your early game focus meta. So by playing a champion like Pantheon, you're going to be able to get priority in most lanes in the early game. When you do end up snowballing your lane really well, you're going to be able to roam around the map, help other lanes as well, use your ultimate down bot lane. If you can get like a double kill down bot lane at level 6, then he's a really good champion at just not only winning his lane himself, but also being able to transition that into other lanes and just snowballing super hard. Aftershock Pantheon is also really good into a lot of the most picked top laners. You have picks right now like Jax, Riven, these champions that want to dive onto you in order for them to deal damage. And the Aftershock on Pantheon, super easy to proc in the laning phase. It allows you to win trades very easily whenever it's up, and it just makes him a very strong laning champion in those matchups against like other bruiser champions and other champions that need to get onto you to deal damage. Now that's not to say that Electrocute is bad on Pantheon. I would still run Electrocute on Pantheon top lane if you're in a matchup to where you're not really going to be able to proc Aftershock consistently. So if you're up against a ranged top laner, then I would still run Electrocute. So something like a Teemo or a Lissandra, Cassiopeia, still run Electrocute in those matchups. But if you're in other melee bruiser matchups, I would be taking the Aftershock. So second in the S tier for this patch is going to be Jax, and a pretty laughable nerfs to Jax for this patch, to be honest. Those nerfs really don't do too much to him. The reason to why Jax is so strong right now isn't really because of his Q damage. Like nerfing his Q damage doesn't really do anything to Jax. He's still going to be a very strong pick. He's got one of the best 1/2 item spikes for any top laner in the game. When you get Trinity Force, that's an insanely good spike, and then when you hit Essence Reaver, it just makes him pretty much unkillable in a 1v1 scenario as long as you can play Jax to a decent level. So I just think that overall Jax is one of your better solo carry split push bruiser top laners for 9.2. Now, if you are looking for some good champions to pick into Jax if you're struggling in the matchup, Vlad and Akali tend to do pretty well just because they have pretty easy ways at dodging out of Jax's stun. They also don't really care about the dodge effect from his E because they're not auto attack focused champions. So those are two picks that are pretty good into him. Pantheon and Sion are also pretty good into Jax. So if you are struggling against him, then I would recommend one of those 4 champions. So next in the S tier is going to be Nasus, and Nasus right now is a complete monster for the lower elos. If this was a tier list that was based more so on higher elos, I probably wouldn't have Nasus in the S tier because he is still somewhat exploitable in the early game, but in the lower elos especially, Nasus right now is just an extremely good pick. So with the buffs he got last patch, buffing his Q's damage and buffing the stacks he gets from his Q, it just allows him to accelerate into a mid to late game much earlier on, and you're not going to be sitting on like your early game Nasus for as long as you would previously. So you're going to be able to hit that mid game spike. You're going to be able to just become a lot stronger earlier on into the game, and that just really helps Nasus out a lot. The Ignite nerfs in this patch are also pretty nice for the Nasus pick because it does mean other early game focused champions do have a little bit less kill pressure against him in the laning phase. So direct buffs in previous patches and then some small indirect buffs in the past few patches here have made Nasus a much stronger pick. Now for rune choices on Nasus right now, both Conquer and Grasp are doing very well. I would resort to Grasp most of the time just because it allows Nasus to get past his weaker early game a little bit easier, but if you are confident that you can win the laning phase and you don't need the added sustain from Grasp, then Conquer is also a good option. Number 4 here on the S tier for this patch is going to be Riven, and Riven right now, very similar to Jax, is doing very good with Essence Reaver. Essence Reaver for both Jax and Riven just make them insanely strong champions. Once you pick that item up on the Riven, it just allows you to have insane 1v1, even 1v2 potential. I don't know if you guys were watching the Twitch rivals at all over the past week, but the Riven players in that tournament with the Essence Reaver were just able to turn so many like 1v2 and 1v3 scenarios, and if you're able to play Riven at a decent level, then she's just a very strong pick right now with that item. This patch is also super good for Riven because with the Urgot nerfs, that's a matchup that in the past she's tended to struggle with a little bit, and with Urgot getting nerfed in this patch, that's definitely really nice for Riven. It just makes her even stronger now. With other top laners as well getting nerfed, like the Aurelia, like the Aatrox, there's just a lot of picks that are getting nerfed in the top lane that makes it a lot easier for Riven to succeed. What is a top lane tier list without Sion? So Sion is still just going to be one of your most consistent top lane picks that you can play if you're new to top lane, if you're auto-filled top lane, if you're just looking for a very easy champion to pick up, then Sion is going to be your pick. He does also get a nice indirect buff in this patch with the Sunfire Cape buff, so I do think that Tank Sion is going to be the one you're going to want to play more often, and it is going to be the more consistent one, but you do see a lot of other players going for something like a Titanic Hydra and then into Asterix and going for a more AD focused build. There are two different playstyles. One is going to give you a little bit more damage and a little bit more 1v1 carry potential, but I think the Tank Sion is going to be the one that's just overall going to be most consistent for most games. And then a few counters to the meatball in the top lane. You have Vayne as a pretty good counter pick, and you're gonna see this one also a lot over in Korea right now. Kleptomancy Vayne top lane into some like tankier picks like the Sion is just a pretty good pick because very easy to dodge out on Sion skill shots in the laning phase, very easy to get your Klepto proc, so that is a pick that if you can play Vayne at a good level, then I would consider. And then also Darius, pretty good into tanks, Lysandra also pretty good into Sion, and then Riven is also one more pick. And then last but definitely not least, to round out the S tier for 9.2 is going to be Vladimir. So Vladimir's kind of a pick that's been creeping up over the past few patches in the top lane, and it's kind of just come out of nowhere, but right now over in Korea, it actually has the highest pick rate for any top lane champion, whereas in other regions in like NA and EU, it's got a decent pick rate, but it's definitely not as high as over in Korea. Vladimir top though is just overall a very consistent, just very safe blind pick top laner right now. He's not really gonna lose lane when you're going up against these champions right now, like Nasus, like the Jax, the Pantheon in the top lane. You're gonna be able to just very easily farm up in those matchups. Other champions don't really have a ton of kill pressure against Vlad in the laning phase because of his pool, because of his sustain, and you're also going to be running phase rush on this Vladimir top lane, so even if one of these champions tries to dive onto you like a Riven or a Jax, you just very easily kite away with your phase rush, so he's just overall got a very safe and very consistent laning phase. Now with that being said, he is still a little bit punishable in the first few levels, so before Vlad gets his pool in the laning phase, if you are playing a strong early game champion, that is where you should be looking to punish him. So if you're playing someone like Riven or Jax, try to get the level 2 on the Vladimir, try to go for an all-in at level 2, and I would recommend if you are playing an aggressive top into Vlad, I would run the Ignite. Even though Ignite did get nerfed in this patch, it just does do a really good job at countering him, and also if you are playing an AD champion, then grabbing an Executioner's Calling is also a pretty good idea. And then if we take a look at my tier 2 or A tier for this patch, there's a few different champions I want to talk about. The first one being Urgot. So Urgot is moving down into A tier for this patch. Previous patches, I did have him in S tier, but the 3 nerfs he did receive in this patch are enough to drop him down. The W nerf especially is the one that kind of tipped him over the edge because your W being on a 17-second cooldown now for Urgot for the first few levels in the laning phase means that his ability to trade in the laning phase does get a lot weaker. He is a lot more exploitable in the early game now, and champions that do have like much shorter cooldowns in the early game are just gonna be able to punish Urgot a lot harder. One pick I would definitely look out for in this patch is the Vladimir top lane pick. So Vladimir top is a really good pick into a lot of the meta top lane champions right now. So he does very well into things like Riven, Jax, he does pretty well into Yasuo as well. So those champions are being played a lot right now, and you can play Volley to some very good success into them. He also got a lot of direct and indirect buffs in this patch. So his E is now going to do 8% of the target's max HP if they are airborne, which is really nice. His ultimate also did get a buff in this patch, and then he got indirect buffs because Sunfire Cake got a buff, Ignite got nerfed, so things are just slowly adding up for Volibear for this patch right now, so I would definitely look out for him. Yorick is also another pick that's definitely on the edge of being S tier for this patch. I thought that with the changes he did receive in this patch that it would jump him up into S tier, but he's just on the fence right now. Like if he got one more nice buff, then it would bump him up into S tier, but just overall really nice quality of life changes for Yorick in this patch, and especially if you are in the lower elos, then I would definitely consider picking up Yorick. So for my tier 3 or B tier for this patch, a lot of these champions here are just going to be pretty inconsistent most of the time, and they're champions that, although they can do pretty well in certain matchups, they're going to get destroyed in other matchups, so they're just not going to be super reliable picks for solo queue unless you know really how to play them at a good level. One pick I'd definitely look out for though in this patch is a pretty good counter pick is the Vayne top lane. Vayne top lane with Kleptomancy is being played quite a bit right now over in Korea, and it is having really good success. It's a pretty good pick into any champion that just can't really dive onto Vayne in the laning phase and can't really threaten to kill her. So someone like a Sion, someone like a Nasus, Vayne can do pretty well into. It just allows her to very easily proc Kleptomancy in those matchups, farm up to her 2 to 3 item spike, and just have a very early mid game spike and just start to take over the game. And then to round out the video here, the tier 4 or C tier for this patch, these champions, definitely stay away from them unless you're a one trick on these champions. They're just not going to be worth playing for solo queue in this patch. I feel bad for Aurelia mains because she's just been nerfed like way too much over the past few patches now. The nerfs in this patch just really hurt her even harder. I'm pretty sure her win rate dropped to like a 42% win rate in this patch, which is just insane. She has like one of the lowest win rates for any champion in the game now, and like I said, unless you can play Aurelia at a very high level, she's just not worth picking right now. Also, some of these other picks here like the Nard, the Ornn, the Shen, they're picks that are still going to be pretty good for competitive play, but for solo queue they're just overall not very good picks at all because they require a lot more team coordination in order for them to be at their highest level. So that is going to round out the first tier list for Season 9, the top lane tier list here for patch 9.2. If you guys did enjoy this video, then be sure to drop a like and subscribe if you have yet to already. So thanks for watching guys, have an awesome day, and I will see you in my next video.